Good morning to you all. Mr. Siminya.
Good morning, Chair, and good morning to the commissioners as well. This morning we're having Mr. Jeffries, who will react to the evidence previously given by Mr. Kalata, and he is going to be led by Advocate Millard.
Yes.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners, and good morning, Mr. Jeffrey. Mr. Jeffrey, as Mr. Khampepe said...
Wait, Ms. Millard. We've got to
swear him in.
Swear the witness first before you can leave him. Yes. Mr. Jeffries, are you going to give your evidence under oath or affirmation?
It'll be under affirmation.
Affirmation. Do you affirm that the evidence you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I affirm that it'll be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Ms. Millard?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Jeffrey, Mr. Kalata gave evidence at this commission, and he made various statements about you concerning an interview that you had with him in 2017. And you've been asked to come to explain the background and the context in which you made those statements. And you have made an affidavit, which is at page 2310 of the bundle of documents in front of you. Do you have the bundle?
I've got my affidavit. I don't. There is a file with a bundle which I just found here, but right. I'm happy with just. I think at this stage, if I've got the bundle, I've got my affidavit, and I've got. So yeah, okay. That's what I've got. You can refer me maybe to pages if you want to.
Yes, your affidavit that you made is at page 2301 of the bundle. I just want you to look... 2310. I just want you to look at it so that you can confirm.
Okay, so I must use this because you're going to go through those pages. Sure.
Yes.
I don't think
do you need some
bundle.
Do you need some assistance?
2310, wait.
Okay, someone will assist you.
There's a whole lot of other things in the file. Oh, there. Okay.
Right.
Thanks. Okay, I've got it now.
All right. Thank you. All right. You'll see that your affidavit starts at page 2310.
That's correct.
And it runs for 14 pages. Yes. On the 14th page at page 2323.
Yeah.
That appears to be your signature.
Yeah.
Can you confirm that that is your signature?
That is my signature, and this appears to be my affidavit that I commissioned or I signed.
Thank you. Now, the basis on which you've been called here, as we've already set out, is Mr. Lukhanya Kalata's evidence that he gave to this commission, where he claimed that during an interview with you in 2017, you had discussed the TRC prosecutions and you'd made certain statements. Now, in your affidavit, you set out the evidence at page 2315.
Yeah.
And at paragraph 20 of your statement, you record what Mr. Kalata said when he was doing research for his book, My Father Died for This. Could you read paragraph 21 into the record, please?
All right. Mr. Kalata stated, I had a meeting with the former Deputy Minister of Justice, John Jeffery, where I spoke to him about why the state was not pursuing or prosecuting these cases. I remember that in one of those conversations that I had with him, the Deputy Minister or former Deputy Minister said to me that, it was not for if it were not for the agreements that were made, they would have, perhaps pursued the Craddock 4 matter. I was very disturbed by that because whatever agreements that had been made did not involve us as a family.
And you were asked by Commissioner Gabriel.
Sorry, he was asked.
Yes, when he was asked by Commissioner Gabriel whether he'd asked you about the nature of the agreements to which you referred, his response was that his understanding was that political agreements reached during the transition had resulted in the failure to prosecute his father's case, and that the government's hands were tied. And then at paragraph 23 of your affidavit, you write that he stated further that I told him that this was the price we have to pay in order to move the country forward. And he said that he was deeply disturbed by this, particularly because the Kalata family had not been party to any such agreements. Now, in his book, he has made reference to the discussion with you. We have referred to what he says in his book, in your affidavit at paragraph 24, and I wonder if you could please read that into the record.
In his book, paragraph 24, in his book, Mr. Kalata records that more than 32 years after the Craddock 4 murders, he interviewed me in my capacity as Deputy Minister of Justice in order to understand why prosecutions had not followed. He sought an explanation for why the ANC-led government had failed to prosecute those responsible for the deaths of his father and his colleagues. He records that I stated, "Part of the problem is the nature of our transformation from apartheid to democracy, the negotiated settlement. That was the price that had to be paid."
Yes. And at paragraph 25, you record that according to Mr. Kalata, he then asked whether you were suggesting that the murders of his father and his comrades, as well as those of many other South Africans, including Victoria Mxenge, the PEPCO 3, and Steve Biko, had been used as bargaining tools during the negotiations that led to a democratic South Africa. And he recorded your response as follows, and if you could please read paragraph 26 into the record.
He records that my response was, "That's the price that had to be paid. And we, in brackets, the ANC-led government, don't have the resources to reopen all these investigations. We don't have the resources to have inquests into all these murders. Some can be done, as has happened with Ahmed Timol, as has been done with Nokuthula Simelane. The problem is there are so many. That raid into Mthatha and the Transkei that killed 2 young boys, and I mean literally boys, was openly admitted as an operation. It was the army, I think, that went in and they claimed they were raiding some or other PAC or MK person's house, and they killed 2 young boys. I mean, there's so many. The whole of KZN, nobody knows what happened to most of the cases. It's unfortunately the result, I think, of our transition.
Yes, and he records in his book that he wasn't satisfied with the responses, and he pressed you further because what he wanted was you to explain whether he would now have to explain to his mother, according to you, that she and the rest of the family, particularly his younger sister, who had never seen her father, would never see justice for the life of Ford Kalata. And he records your response as, and you've listed it in paragraph 28. If you could read that into the record, please. He
recorded my response as, "The problem we've got is, yes, you want to know what happened, but what happens if we can't do it all at one time, as it were? I appreciate that what I'm saying must sound terrible, but for me the pressure is the issue of getting a functioning justice system now that can deal with present-day crimes and ensure that perpetrators get brought to book."
All right, thank you. Mr. Jeffrey, in preparing for this affidavit and your statement and your evidence to the Commission, you had a look at the transcripts of the interview between yourself and Mr. Kalata because it was recorded. Is that correct?
Yeah, I focused more on the audio-visual recordings. I looked at both the transcript and the audio-visual recordings. I would suggest to the commissioners that if they do want to see what was really said, that they listen to the audio-visual recordings. because they give more of a context. The transcript is generally accurate, although, there was a third person in the interview, and it is pointed out, I think, in Mr. Kalata's supplementary affidavit that he submitted on Monday, and I referred to her in my affidavit, Ms. Maria de la Tonga, but unfortunately in the transcript she's recorded as Ms. Kalata. Which gives a completely different perspective if it's a family member. So what I'm saying is I've gone through, I've refreshed my memory. This interview was, I think, 9 years ago now. But I would, if the commissioners are wanting to see really what was said, to please watch the transcripts. Watch the recordings.
Yes. You referred to Mr. Kalata's supplementary affidavit, which he sent to us on Monday. Attached to that supplementary affidavit are extracts.
Sorry, you say watch the recordings. Are you saying listen to the recordings? Or was it videoed?
So they were audio-visual recordings, they're video recordings with sound, yes.
Okay.
So there's only one. There's not audio and an audio-visual. It's just the audio-visual. But I'm suggesting that you watch the audio and listen to the audio-visual recording.
I follow. Thank you.
And it also, because, we can get more onto that, but it was less of an interview and more of a discussion.
Right. So, Mr. Jeffrey, you have looked at the supplementary affidavit, and you have looked at the transcripts that are attached to that supplementary affidavit.
Yes.
And your impressions of that transcript, is it an accurate reflection of the discussion?
It's largely, but it obviously omits, as it says itself, it omits certain duplication, so it doesn't purport to be 100% recording. That's number one. Secondly, there are mistakes that I don't know how they could have happened, where Miss Martina de la Tonga is listed as or recorded as being Ms. Kalata, also making comments and asking questions. So that's incorrect, obviously. He does point that out in his supplementary affidavit. But generally, it is relatively accurate, although the full thing is the audiovisual recording.
Yeah. But in relation to the specific comments attributed to you by Mr. Kalata in his evidence and in the book, are they an accurate reflection?
Well, Mr. Kalata's comments in the book, no, they're not an accurate reflection. As I think I'd said earlier, I had found and I think I deal with it in my affidavit? I do to some extent under paragraph 31, and I'd wanted to engage with Mr. Kalata because I knew of the problems he was experiencing, and I wanted to discuss and engage with him. And his concern was, no prosecutions for the Craddock 4 specifically. And it was also what I wanted to convey was some of the broader contexts. But I'll can get onto that more later. But as far as so when the book came out about a year later, I was quite surprised to see that he had quite a negative reaction. He felt I was callous. He was angry with me. I didn't get that sense in the interview.
Yes,
but, sorry?
Mr. Jeffrey, sorry to intervene. Now that you have referred to paragraph 31, but you've already moved elsewhere, maybe you could read 31 into the record.
31 into the record, yes, Commissioner. I knew of Mr. Kalata before the interview, having followed his views on the failure of the criminal justice system with regard to the Craddock 4 murders. I was aware that Mr. Kalata regarded the failure to secure prosecutions for the Craddock 4 murders as a failure of the criminal justice system. I knew that he remained affected by the loss of his father and dissatisfied with the answers the TRC process had provided to his family. In agreeing to the interview, I was happy to engage with Mr. Kalata to discuss the broader issues relating to the TRC and post-TRC processes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jeffrey, the interview took place at the time that you were Deputy Minister of Justice. Is that correct?
Sorry.
Right. Do you need to take some water?
No,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
fine. I'm sorry, I have a bit of upper respiratory infection. I felt, though, that it was important to come at my stipulated date and time and not send a sick note, as there have been some issues in other commissions raised with those, and I didn't want to be part of those. So I think I'm able to give evidence to testify, but just excuse the coughing, if you don't mind.
Understood.
Yes, you were saying that at the time you were the Deputy
Yeah.
Minister of Justice. Now, was the interview in your capacity as Minister of Justice?
Deputy Minister,
Minister of Justice.
look, it was to some extent, but for me it was, and this is why I list my involvement, my history in the early part of my affidavit, of somebody who had been in the struggle, obviously from a different perspective to Mr. Kalata, and particularly the conflict in KZN, which was really a low-intensity civil war. But it was in that context and wanting to give those, have a discussion from the context of where I was coming from. Around these issues. So it wasn't just in my capacity, or for me it was more as somebody who's got experience from a different perspective in these issues.
Yes, at paragraph 17 of your affidavit on page 2314 of the record, you also mentioned that you yourself are listed in the TRC final report as a victim of a human rights violation. There's you explain what that's a reference to?
Well, basically, there's reference to the assassination of Reggie Khampepe, where I was driving the car that Reggie and I and a third person, Sheikh Cele, were traveling in, and we were ambushed, and Reggie was killed and Sheikh's was injured. I luckily was not injured, and the TRC held a hearing at the Pietermaritzburg City Hall, and I was asked to testify at that hearing. The hearing was into the assassination of Reggie Khampepe. So I was asked to testify there, which I gladly did. I think because of that, the TRC bureaucracy included me as a victim of a human rights violation. However, I think the point I make in my affidavit, I wasn't applying to be one. I didn't want to be listed as one, as I made my contribution, out of commitment, and there are many people who suffered far greater human rights violations than I did, simply by being black. So I was a bit, I only discovered it later. It was pointed out to me and I was a bit taken aback, but I'm not alleging any improper action on the part of the TRC. As I said, I think it was just the people who testified into these hearings into human rights violations, they get listed as victims.
And at paragraph 32 of your affidavit, you reference this to say that your own experiences during the conflict in KZN gave you some understanding
Yes.
of the impact of political violence on families.
Yes, and it was both political violence. One of the very early victims in the KZN violence was the criminal justice system. It's corruption of basically that Inkatha warlords could commit crimes with impunity. So there was that element. Then there was also the element of state, apartheid state, and KwaZulu state, if that was a different state, their involvement in covert operations. So it was a whole complicated landscape.
And you say that in speaking to Mr. Kalata, and here I'm quoting from your affidavit, again at paragraph 32, you say, "I was not seeking to minimize the suffering of the Kalata family. Rather, I sought to explain that their experience formed part of a broader national tragedy in which many families were left without full answers about the deaths of their loved ones." Why was that important to you in the context of your discussion and your meeting with Mr. Kalata?
From what I'd seen from Mr. Kalata, the focus was specifically on his father and his father's comrades' murder, rather than broader political issues. So it was to sort of see if giving a KZN context helped him, gave him a bit of a different perspective. So it was from that perspective.
Right, I want to move on now to deal with what you actually said during the interview, unless there's something you...
No, well, you had asked me about the book and the interview.
Yes.
And I said I gave the interview, I didn't take any notes. I knew it was recorded, but I didn't take any notes. The book came out. I was surprised about some of the things that Mr. Kalata said about his reaction to me. But I let it be. I didn't have any, I didn't ask for the recording or anything. I just felt, okay, that was the way he felt. But what I did subsequently was do a comparison between what is in the transcript after I subsequently got the transcript after being called to testify here, and comparing that to what is in Mr. Kalata's book. And Mr. Kalata's references to me are not an accurate reflection. I can go through those issues if you want. One of the most glaring is that Mr. Kalata refers to a comrade of mine being killed, whose name he refers to as Reggie and Kabinda. Now, that was obviously not what was in the interview. It was Reggie Khampepe. And it's a pity that Mr. Kalata couldn't have got that right. I think he may have combined the issue with, or been thinking of Sfiso and Kabinda, which is another issue on its own. So anyway, but there's a number of, I mean, what he'd basically done, I don't think I made references to the ANC government prosecuting, because the ANC government wasn't prosecuting. It was the NPA. There's a separation between the prosecuting authority and the government, and the NPA should not be prosecuting at the behest of the government. So those would be some of the things. So a lot of what he put in the interview, and that's why, in the book, is out of context. What then happened was, I would have expected he would have referred to the video recording he'd at least taken, but because of those inaccuracies, I don't think he did when he wrote the book. And then he made later references in affidavits, in court applications, and then ultimately in terms of his testimony here. And each time it became more inaccurate. It was a bit like a toy telephone where you repeat something to the person next to you who repeats it to the next person, and you look at what the message is that comes out at the end, and it's got a bit distorted.
Well, let's look at what he says. Let me take you back to what he says in the book, and then let's look at what you've said in your statement with reference to what he said. So at paragraph 34 of your statement, you deal with the context in which you made references to the negotiated settlement in the TRC process. And what he says in the book, at page 248, it's referenced in your affidavit, he says that when he asked you about when he wanted to hear an explanation for why the ANC-led government had failed to prosecute those responsible, you began by saying part of the problem is the nature of our transition from apartheid to democracy. The negotiated settlement, that was the price that had to be paid. I then asked the Deputy Minister if he was implying that the murders of my father and his comrades were used as pawns or tools. His response astounded me, and he said that's part of the price that had to be paid. Now, in your affidavit, you contextualize that, and in relation at paragraph 34, could you read that into the record?
I did not suggest prosecutions were abandoned because of any secret or improper agreement. My references to agreements and to the negotiated settlement were to the political negotiations that took place between the National Party government and other political parties and organizations during South Africa's transition to democracy, which ultimately led to the interim constitution and the establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Yeah. And you yourself were not personally involved in the negotiations?
No.
Yeah. But you say at paragraph 35 that your understanding, however, is that the question of amnesty was a central issue for the National Party negotiations, and that the ANC was not prepared to accept a blanket amnesty. So when you talk about various inaccuracies or impressions that are created, and you correct that, or you say that you want to correct that, is this one of the issues that you're referring to, that you want to correct in relation to what the agreement was about?
Yeah, I mean, he's I think when he testified here, and I'd have to look up again the references, but it was more that I might have been talking about it post-TRC agreement, which I definitely was not. The only agreements, the agreement that I was talking to was the agreement on an amnesty process, which required full disclosure and which then was incorporated into the Truth and Reconciliation Act, and the process followed.
Yes.
I was not referring to anything post the TRC process.
Could you read into the record what you say at paragraph 37 and 38 of your affidavit?
The point I was seeking to make was that the negotiated settlement, including the Truth and Reconciliation process, formed part of the means by which South Africa brought a period of violent conflict to an end and sought to avoid further loss of life. That is the context in which I referred to the price that had to be paid. And the issue of it's maybe a speculation on my part is that the apartheid regime was not defeated. They got to a point where they saw that sustaining apartheid was not sustainable. So there were negotiations. I think the impression I've got...
Sorry to interrupt. Council had wanted you to stop at 38 and then you can comment.
Okay.
Yes.
Could you read paragraph 38?
Oh, 38, sorry, okay. My reference to the negotiated settlement, apologies, and the amnesty process should not be understood as suggesting there was any agreement not to pursue perpetrators who had not received amnesty. To the contrary, I have no knowledge of any agreement, arrangement, or understanding that such persons would be exempt from investigation or prosecution, and I was never aware of any such policy during my time in government.
Thank you. Now, in Mr. Kalata's supplementary affidavit, which is in the bundle of documents, you should have it. He at paragraph 11 of his affidavit, he says the following. On page 45 of the transcript bundle, Mr. Jeffrey states the following. I think my sense is there was a political decision in the first 10 years of not going for having the TRC process, not going for prosecutions. And I think there's been some evidence in that regard. There was this policy that was challenged relating to prosecutions. And he says that in your statement, you don't address the statement about the political decision not to pursue prosecutions in the TRC cases in this affidavit. What is your comment to that? Do you agree with that statement?
Well, I think I addressed it in paragraph 39. And would you like me to read that into the record?
Yes, thank you.
So it's during the interview, I expressed the view that in the early years of South Africa's democracy, the focus was on allowing the TRC to do its work before attention turned to possible prosecutions arising from apartheid-era crimes. I was expressing a personal impression of that period rather than referring to any formal policy, decision, or agreement of which I had knowledge. My sense was that the priority at the time was to hear the accounts of victims, consider amnesty applications, and allow the TRC process to unfold. It was only later that attention turned to the question of prosecutions. I do want to sort of point out, Mr. Kalata says at 11.2, Mr. Jeffrey did not address the aforesaid statement about, and this would be my emphasis, the political decision not to pursue prosecutions. I was not speaking about a political decision, the political decision. I was speculating. But basically, look, it's an issue of debate, so I don't know how much detail I should go on to. There were some cases in the first 5 years of our democracy. There was the Cock trial, which was successful. There was the Motherwell bombing case, which resulted in convictions, but then got caught up in issues of amnesty applications and taking those applications on review. So that ultimately those convictions or the accused were all given amnesty, or the amnesty they were refused amnesty by the TRC. That was overturned on review, except for Mr. Gideon Nieuwoud, who had passed away, so he couldn't serve his sentence. So there was that. Then there was the Milan trial, which was not successful. And there was the Vota Basson trial. So there were trials going on, but even Motherwell, which was successful, ran into problems over actually getting anyone to serve imprisonment. So so the issue was, I think the emphasis was on, you've got this TRC process, let it unfold rather than rushing off to prosecute people. And where those attempts had been made, they weren't particularly successful.
Because one of the issues that Mr. Kalata appears to take with you is that you express the view during the interview that the criminal justice system just simply doesn't have the capacity to investigate every apartheid-era crime. And you deal with that at paragraph 41 of your affidavit. what were you talking about in relation to that?
Look, I think as everybody knows, the National Prosecuting Authority did have its capacity reduced for a variety of reasons after 2009. And it lost a lot of skilled prosecutors. It lost a lot of capacity that it had, and there was a lot of corruption that was emerging from state capture cases or whatever, and state capture by 2017 was something more broadly in the public domain. And so for me it was a priority that the NPA must focus on those cases, not to the exclusion of other cases like post-TRC cases, but a major priority at that period, and would still be now, is the corruption prosecutions.
So he says in the extract of the book, he says, your statement that the government has no resources to prosecute these crimes rings hollow. How dare he cite a lack of state resources as an explanation for what is clearly a lack of political will? I find this most insulting.
Yeah, well, I didn't unfortunately pick that up from the interview, but I didn't say that the state didn't have the capacity to prosecute at all. And in fact, I referred not just to prosecutions, but to inquests and other such bodies. And my issue was that I think it was probably more from an absolutist point of view of it wouldn't be able to look at every TRC case. Obviously, I mean, I do think it was a problem that there weren't enough post-TRC prosecutions, and that they sort of did grind to a halt. I mean, the people who applied for amnesty and who didn't get it should have been prosecuted. Where there were 4 people who committed a crime, a human rights violation, and 3 apply for amnesty and the 4th one doesn't, the 4th one should have been prosecuted. So those at the very least should have been prosecuted. I was just more meaning that you can't go through all of them.
Yes.
There's so many cases. There would need to be prioritization. So I think possibly there was a bit of a misunderstanding between Mr. Tkalata and myself in terms of what I was trying to convey. Maybe the fault is with me and I didn't convey it properly. I think that would have to be judged from watching the interview.
Yes.
I think,
Mr. Jeffrey, I've highlighted paragraph 41, which intrigues me. If you could read it, please.
In my affidavit, Commissioner?
Yes.
Okay. During the 41.
Yes, 41, please.
During the discussion, I expressed the view that the criminal justice system did not have the capacity to investigate every apartheid-era crime while simultaneously responding to contemporary demands such as serious violent crime, corruption, and state capture. I was attempting to explain what I understood to be the practical constraints under which the criminal justice system was operating at the time, including the need to make difficult decisions about the allocation of limited resources. In doing so, I was not suggesting that apartheid-era crimes were unimportant or undeserving of investigation. I think that does summarize what I was trying to say just now.
Yes, that's why I referred to this. Okay.
yes, because you also say at paragraph 42 that at the time of the discussion with Mr. Tkalata in 2017, there were prosecutions that were ongoing. Would you like to explain that?
Well, look, there was the Nokuthula Simelane murder matter, which had, I think, started. and there were a few others. There was I can't remember when it started, the Madonsela case in KwaZulu-Natal, in Durban. Yeah, there were cases. Unfortunately, well, Madonsela completed. Simelane, unfortunately, has got stuck.
Yeah. And that's why you say at paragraph 42, you say that was one of the reasons why I did not regard post-TRC prosecutions as having been abandoned altogether. I was, however, conscious that many families still do not have answers about what happened to their loved ones. The Simelane prosecution showed that prosecutions could still be pursued where there was sufficient evidence and a decision by the NPA to proceed. Yeah. And then at paragraph 43 of your affidavit, you make reference to discussions about where Mr. Kalata could obtain additional information if he wished to pursue the matter further, and whether the Department of Justice would be prepared to make the information accessible. Now, you make it clear in the next paragraph that you didn't offer to intervene in any prosecutorial decisions, or that you didn't make any additional comments other than what you say in paragraph 43. But what was the purpose of that discussion about where he could obtain additional information?
Well, it was that there'd already been 2 inquests into the Craddock 4 murders. It's 2 or 3. The current one is the 3rd or the 4th? The 3rd one.
Third.
Okay, so there've been two previous inquests. Mr. Kalata was very keen on having F.W. de Klerk held accountable for his role in the murders of the Craddock 4. And so the issue was whether you try and get the NPA to prosecute, and that would depend on them feeling they've got enough evidence, a reasonable basis on which to secure a conviction. They would need that evidence. Or even if it were on the issue of a reopening of the inquest, that he may want to look at some of the TRC records. Maybe he already had them, so maybe it was a stupid point that I was making, but he did appear to be grateful for me making that a point. Maybe he was just being polite. But anyway, that was the issue. I remember it's not in the affidavit, but I had even suggested to Mr. Kalata was that if he wanted to get Mr. de Klerk, who was still alive at the time, into a witness box, then he was probably better off pursuing an inquest. Because if the state did not prove sufficient evidence against Mr. de Klerk in a criminal matter, he could, would probably not even be put to his defense, or could decline to testify. And the problem with the Milan case, Magnus Milan case, and the Vota Vasson case was the chain of evidence, the link between what they were doing and what was happening on the ground.
Okay. Right, I'd like to turn now to the transcript to look at what you actually said. And if you could turn, it's the transcript that's attached to Mr. Kalata's affidavit. If you could please turn to page 37 of that transcript. Are you there?
I'm there.
All right. If you could read into the record what you say in relation to the problem, where you say the problem is the nature of our transition. Could you read that into the record?
Sorry, the whole part of my input on that page.
You can read and I'll stop you when I
Okay.
want you to stop.
Look, I think as part of the problem is the nature of our transition, the negotiated settlement, and yeah, that's sort of, as I said, part of the price that had to be paid. Prosecuting someone would depend on evidence against that person, so I don't know enough detail of the case in terms of all. I remember was this sort of so-called confusion as to what permanent removal meant, with them all trying to claim that it didn't mean what to most of us would seem obvious. And I suppose it depends on who was in a meeting, and I suppose it's an interesting point where a decision is taken. Yeah, I don't know. But the problem is that there's so many. I mean, you know, I was just thinking, seeing it's that raid into Mthatha in the Transkei that killed 2 young boys, I mean literally boys, which was openly admitted as an operation. I mean, it was the army. I think they went in.
You can stop
Okay,
there.
okay.
All right. So that's what you say in relation to the price that had to
Yes.
be paid. Yeah. And then if you turn over to page 38, Mr. Kalata says, and it hurts me because I think that maybe somebody in that negotiating table, my father's life was used to negotiate. And could you read your response into the record, please?
I said, look, I doubt if, look, I wasn't part of those negotiations, okay? I was in KwaZulu-Natal. I doubt if it would have been specifically, you know, the Craddock 4 matter. I imagine the regime, people would have had a lot of things they were afraid of in terms of being brought to book. You know, it's ironic that one of the things I don't talk about in the 80s was, I think it was 80, 82 or 83, sort of a march in Pietermaritzburg, as in other places on the quota bills, because the then Minister of Education wanted to set quotas to restrict the number of black people going into universities. It was sort of the English liberal universities. So, you know, I don't know what the quotas were, but there was sufficient of a protest from those universities. Who was the Minister of Education who wanted to put a cap effectively on black students at university? F.W. de Klerk.
You can stop there. And then at page 45, if you could read into the record what you say at the bottom, Mr. Kalata says, I hear you, but how do we then explain what seems to us as a lack of willingness from, if I can put it crudely, our government to go after and prosecute? And then he says, because if there was willingness, then maybe something could have been done in the 90s, then we would not be sitting here. And you respond, if you could read that into the record, please.
So that's the second part on page 45.
Yes.
Okay.
What your response is.
Okay. This is the one that he referred to in his supplementary affidavit.
Yes.
I think there was a political, in my sense, there was a political decision in the first 10 years of not going for having the TRC process, not going for prosecutions. So the KwaMakuta massacre case, that's the Milan one, would have been an aberration, something unusual. And I think there's some evidence in that regard. There was this policy that was challenged related to prosecutions. That was all then. The issue is then what happens now. And I think that those are decisions by the NPA. You've seen decisions on the Simelane matter, disappearance, let's put it that way, to have a prosecution. You've seen a decision on the Timol in terms of an inquest. With the Simelane matter, there was litigation, as I'm sure you know. I'm not sure to what extent there was with the Timol matter.
All right. Now, when you say, my sense is that there was a political decision in the first 10 years of not going for having the TRC process, what do you mean?
I think what I was meaning was, and I've explained it earlier, and it's in my affidavit, was that because the country was having this TRC process in which perpetrators of human rights violations could apply for amnesty and get amnesty if they made full disclosures, that it was a bit difficult to run a prosecution process at the same time as that amnesty process. It did happen in the cases that I've mentioned. And in the case of the successful, it didn't seem to have affected the de Kock case that much. But I think the TRC process and the review applications resulted in a person who was found guilty of murder not serving his sentence because he died before that decision was taken to overturn the amnesty, the decision to grant him amnesty.
Mr. Jeffrey, if it was
The other way around, sorry.
If it was suggested to you that what you were saying here was that there was a political decision not to prosecute in the first 10 years after democracy, what would your response be?
Well, no, that is not what I meant. Political maybe. It's more the broader issue of the broader qualification of political. That was it appropriate to be running criminal prosecutions at the same time as TRC amnesty applications for those same crimes were being taken? And that's what I think I meant by a political decision. What I did not mean that the ANC or the ANC government had taken any decision that there shouldn't be prosecutions.
Thank you. And the last part of the transcript that I want to refer you to is at page 48. If you could turn there. And I'd like you to read into the record what your response was to Mr. Kalata's question when he says, as someone who sits in government, is this something that you would like to see resolved as Deputy Minister of Justice in the country? And he's referring there to decisions to prosecute. I'd like you to read your response.
I said, I wish we could investigate all these cases. I wish you know, but that's an ideal world. And if what I would say is there's enough evidence for a different conclusion, then sure, that should be followed. That should be given priority. Can I explain?
Yes.
What I was trying to say was that if there's enough evidence, there should be prosecutions.
Thank you. Mr. Jeffrey, I don't have any more questions for you.
Thank you, Ms. Millat. Mr. Kwala.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, Deputy Minister. I just have two...
Sorry, Mr. Gwala, can you speak up or put the mic closer?
Okay.
I think my ears are also a bit blocked with my sinus things.
I will do my best.
That's better, thanks. Yeah.
Thank you. I heard you in your testimony, you referred to 2009 when you said the budget of the NPA was reduced. Did I get that correctly?
No, I wasn't meaning the budget. I was more meaning, well, I guess it was initially problems at the top. The removal of Vusi Pikoli as National Director, which started in, I think, 2007. Then Benzi Simelane was brought in, and that got overturned. So there were all the issues of more linked, I guess, to state capture. So I wasn't specifically referring to budget cuts at the NPA, and I don't actually know if there were any budget cuts. I mean, there were overall budget cuts from government in the Zuma period, in the period when I was in the latter part of the Zuma administration, when I was Deputy Minister of Justice. But that was sort of across the board, but I wasn't referring to budget cuts for the NPA specifically.
No, I get you.
But it also was issues of, the Glynis Breitenbach experience, or what she experienced, was very wrong, and that she effectively got hounded out of the National Prosecuting Authority for doing her job in trying to follow up corruption or non-prosecutions. So those are the kinds of things that undermined the prosecuting authority and people with skills leaving.
All right. The people leaving, that was going to be my next question. So when you referred to people leaving, you referred to people such as Vusi Pikoli, Menzies Melane, and Breitenbach, Ms. Breitenbach.
Those would be some of the more high-profile ones. Obviously, Advocate or Mr. Similane was removed by the court, found not to be...
No, Deputy Minister, I understand. I don't want us to explain. I just wanted to understand if, when you were talking of people leaving, because I got an impression that a number of prosecutors were leaving the NPA. So you're actually talking about those high profile...
I'm talking about high profile, but without being able to name names, I suspect that, as with general attrition, that there would have been skilled prosecutors leaving. And because there seemed to be a lot more problems in the NPA, I'm sure that made some prosecutors, and I'm speculating, feel that it wasn't such a good place to work, but that's just speculation on my part.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Mr. Kwala. Ms. Mchizana.
Thank you, Chair. No questions.
Ms. Kesrick.
Switch off your mics, Mr. Kwala, please.
Where's your mic? Yes, but you said no questions. Yes. Do we have anyone online before I get to Mr. Vani? Mr. Vani?
Thank you, Chair. We do have some follow-up questions. Mr. Jeffrey, firstly, thanks for coming up from Cape Town to be with us today. And also thanks for coming up notwithstanding your condition, which looks quite serious. And I hope we don't go down with whatever you have.
Well, that's why I've got a mask if I'm going to cough and UFR.
Thank you. I should disclose to the commissioners that we've known each other for several years. I think our paths first crossed at Natal University back in the 1980s. And when you became a young attorney working in the political violence, and I was at Legal Resources Centre, we actually did work on some matters, for example, the Bruntville massacre and others with the Goldstone Commission. And I should also disclose that we have had a few meetings over the years while you were Deputy Minister, and I always found your approach in those meetings to be constructive and cooperative. I should also point out that we make no allegations that you've interfered in these cases in any way. Having said that, I do wish to pose some questions to you arising from your statement, your transcript. Sorry, that's the transcript of the meeting with Kalata, and then a few developments that arose while you were on the Portfolio Committee of Justice, and then subsequently as Deputy Minister. I'll try not to keep you too long. Let's turn to your statement from paragraph 34. You deal with references to the negotiated settlement and the TRC process, and you offer an explanation as to what you meant.
Which paragraph are you referring to?
I'm not going to refer to any particular paragraph. But it's from paragraph 34 onwards, under the title "References to the Negotiated Settlement and the TRC Process." And then Ms. Millard referred you to page 45 of the transcript at the bottom, where you made mention of a political decision not to go for prosecutions for the first 10 years. Having the TRC process at the Kwamakuta massacre case would have been an aberration. I suppose from the perspective of Mr. Kalata, he probably had in mind that during the 1990s, there were discussions between the ANC and the former generals, both police and army, to look at ways and means of avoiding prosecutions of apartheid-era crimes. Were you aware of those discussions?
No, I was not aware of those discussions. I was aware of the political negotiations that resulted in the interim constitution, which were on a political party and ANC, and national party government basis, and not involving the generals from the police or the army. I know that there was, I think I'd heard about some negotiations with getting General Constant Viljoen into what were they called then, what it later became the Freedom Front, but there was some other...
It was a confederation of sorts, yeah.
Getting them in, but that was the only engagement with generals that I was aware of, and that was partially in the public domain, and not about amnesty.
Yes. Rob, we won't go into that. Just suffice to say, some of the proposals made in those discussions emerged in one form or another in subsequent years, such as the amendment to the prosecution policy and the political pardons dispensation. Now, in that paragraph 45, you make reference to the Kwamakuta massacre case. That would have been an aberration and something unusual. And you mentioned, and I think there's been some evidence in that regard. And I know I'm asking you to think back over many years, but can you give us a sense of what that evidence might have been?
So which paragraph?
So it's on page 45 of the transcript.
Oh, the transcript.
And right at the bottom, it's in that same passage where you say, I think there was my sense is there was a political decision. And then the next sentence, so the Kwamakuta massacre case would have been an aberration, something unusual, and I think there's been some evidence in that regard.
I had to, on re-listening or re-watching the interview, try and work out what I was meaning in this particular point. I noticed that Mr. Kalata didn't pick up on it in his book or elsewhere, but I'm not entirely sure what I was meaning, but I know what I wasn't meaning was that there was a formal political decision by the ANC not to prosecute. I think the issue was, as I've said earlier, is it did seem, particularly when going back to do a bit of research on those cases, those main cases that I mentioned, then I don't think it was the best thing to run criminal prosecutions at the same time as the TRC. I do think, though, having said that my own personal feeling, speculation, is that the de Kock trial, which was successful, and even the Motherwell trial, which was successful in securing a conviction, did probably put pressure on apartheid operatives to come forward, because the threat of a prosecution hung over their heads. The Milan trial did exactly the opposite, because it failed. So, so I'm saying that, Milan was very high profile. I mean, you talk about discussions with army generals, which I've said I don't know anything about. I'm surprised that there wasn't, if that was happening, there wasn't an effort to stop the trial of the former head of the South African Defence Force for murder at Kwamakuta, that trial proceeded. But yeah, so I think that's what I was talking about, that there wasn't a big push for prosecutions. You did speak about, and I don't have knowledge of this, as I've said, so I'm going on your words, that the amendments to prosecution policy and the political pardon dispensation, I don't know if you mean the special dispensation, which I was involved in, which was not linked to post-TRC issues. I was involved because in KwaZulu-Natal, there was a view that the conflict between the ANC and Inkatha did not end on the 27th of April 1994. It went on for a number of years, I think into the first local government elections. You also had the whole issue of the Richmond conflict, and that Sifiso Nkabinda, who was the Secretary of the Natal Midlands region in KZN, I was his deputy, was exposed as a apartheid agent and expelled, went and joined the UDM, and then embarked on a violent campaign against ANC members, and that there was a peace process in Richmond. Some people were convicted, and there was a push from there to say, look, can't there be a special dispensation for pardons? But the TRC cases were specifically included. So one of the criteria was if you'd applied for amnesty in the TRC and you got refused it, you couldn't apply under this process. But it was more meant to be dealing with the post-94 cases. Also that Inkatha had not really encouraged their members to apply for amnesty. So a lot of their members got left out. But the whole purpose was to not duplicate what happened in the TRC. So I'm not sure how I don't know what was said in these meetings, if they happened, but I'm, from my own knowledge of involvement in the political pardon process dispensation, the special dispensation, that's what it was called, it was not linked to the TRC. And it also was for people who had been found guilty, not for people who had not been charged. So I think the idea was if they'd been found guilty, the evidence which caused that guilty finding would have been aired before the court. On the amendment to the prosecution policy, I mean, it's again, it's speculation. It was before my time. But there is a tension between, and it was right there from the start of the TRC, between truth and justice. And, excuse me, and that to get justice, you needed evidence. You needed to know, to have the evidence to prove guilt, and to prove that beyond reasonable doubt. And that's why I'm also a little bit cynical about this issue of justice is not as easy as it seems. There's the adage of it's better for 9 guilty people to go free than for 1 innocent person to be convicted. I don't know how accurate that is when it comes to the facts, but, you know, the presumption of innocence favors the accused. Guilt beyond reasonable doubt, not guilt on a balance of probabilities. So that makes convictions in any case more difficult than in a civil case. Now, one of the problems with the prosecution policy being overturned was that it did provide for some kind of, because, well, for me, a crucial area, and probably more important than prosecutions, was for people to know what happened, and the families of victims to know what happened and where the bodies, the remains are.
Mr. Jeffrey, sorry to interrupt you. You've gone much further than I anticipated.
Well, you spoke about the prosecution policy, and
yes,
I just thought,
perhaps
so you were inferring that came from this meeting that I don't know anything about, but I'm just saying. And it's also part of the tension possibly between myself and Mr. Kalata, where what happened also with the lack of prosecutions was that information about where remains were, what happened to people, dried up. Because why should perpetrators come forward to confess if they are just going to get prosecuted?
Yes, thank you. I want to return to the passage on page 45, but before I do, I just want to offer a small correction. The political pardons process did include the TRC period, but it was extended to 1999. Although I do agree with you that it was primarily aimed at those who had not applied for amnesty previously for various reasons.
Yeah, maybe just to ensure we're on the same page, I don't disagree with that, and it wasn't what I was trying to say. It was the period from, I can't remember when the starting period was, but there was a specific provision, and correct me if my memory is wrong, that persons who had applied for amnesty under the TRC, who'd had that amnesty refused, could not apply under this process.
Yes, we're in agreement on that. Yeah.
Okay.
So if we go back to that passage, and I should disclose that in the Kwamakuta case, I think you'll be aware, but perhaps the commissioners might not. I served on the investigation task board, which was appointed by the then Minister of Police to oversee the investigations of the investigation task unit, which carried out the investigations in that matter and others. I should also say, to the best of my knowledge, there was no political opposition to that case, at least from the government. There was opposition from other quarters, of course. And on that score, you did mention a few cases, helpfully. You mentioned the Cock, you mentioned Motherwell, that went ahead in those days, and I can offer a few more. For example, Dirk Coetzee and a few others were convicted for the murder of Griffiths Mkhenge in 1997. Of course, they did receive amnesty shortly thereafter. In 98, Ferdy Barnard of the Civil Corporation Bureau, the CCB, he was convicted for the murder of David Webster, and he did serve time in prison. And there were, in fact, a number of convictions arising from the violence in the Midlands in the late 90s. Probably more than 30 convictions. So you would agree that during the 90s, prosecutions did proceed to some degree?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we could go back to your statement, if I can refer you to paragraph 41. And here you were talking about the fact that the criminal justice system didn't have the capacity to investigate every apartheid-era crime while simultaneously responding to contemporary demands such as violent crime, corruption, and state capture. And of course, these were challenges, and I should say, after reading the transcript, and I haven't listened, maybe I will do that in due course, I'll watch the video, but I did find it a very compelling discussion that you and Mr. Kalata had in looking at these challenges. Although you conclude by saying, I was not suggesting that apartheid-era crimes were unimportant or undeserving of investigation. Although from the transcript, it does seem as if you were pointing to this tension between competing demands, overwhelming current problems that the criminal justice system had to address, as well as these older historical cases. And I think Mr. Kalata got the impression that you were saying that oftentimes the historical cases would have to give way to current pressing demands.
Can you refer me to that section of the transcript?
We'll do that. I'll get my colleagues to do that. In the meantime, we'll move on. Let's move to paragraph 42. And here you point to the fact that in your discussion with Mr. Kalata, you mentioned that there was the prosecution of 4 security branch members in connection with the abduction, torture, and murder of Nokuthula Simelane. And that's why you said that was one of the reasons why I did not regard post-TRC prosecutions as having been abandoned altogether. Now, when you say having been abandoned altogether, were you suggesting that to some extent they were abandoned?
I think there was these are my impressions, definitely not on any basis of any decision, but there was a lull. I think part of it was confusion on the part of the NPA, which is my speculation, but with the overturning of that policy and what to do. But you yourself approached me when I was Deputy Minister, when I just got appointed, about the Nokuthula Simelane matter, and why was that not proceeding? I think it was, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was Sean Abrahams who took the decision to institute a prosecution. But I think the issue is, and I would agree with you, for my concern was, why did it take so long? That was a problem. And I would sympathize with Mr. Kalata in wanting to reopen the inquest or have prosecutions for the Craddock 4 murders, why did that need to take so long? But obviously they needed to have the sufficient evidence, and when you raised the issue with me, and I think I've explained in my statement, affidavit, that I believe the separation between the prosecution and the executive, it's very important that there's a separation. So when you took up your complaint that no decision was being taken in the Nokuthula Simelane murder matter, I didn't go to it was Mkhulisi Asana who was NDPP when I came in as Deputy Minister. So I don't know to what extent I went to him or whether it was after, in Sean Abraham's time, but I didn't go and say, what are the reasons? My issue was, look, this is taking a long time. Please, can you look at taking a decision, applying your mind and taking a decision? But I didn't want the detail of this is the evidence we've got, this is where we may have a problem, this is why we're taking long. I felt that would be overstepping. So I think that I would fully agree those decisions were taking too long.
Thank you. The bringing of that prosecution, do you recall that the family, Tembi Nkadimeng, as she was known then, today Tembi Simelane, brought a case in 2015 to compel the NPA either to make a decision on prosecution or to refer to an inquest? Would you accept that it was that litigation that prompted the ultimate decision to proceed with the case in 2016?
Well, I don't know the basis on which they finally took the decision, but I'm sure it's very likely that the threat of, or not the threat, it was there, the litigation put pressure on the NPA or the NDPP to take a decision.
So the Simelane family, as you would understand, I think you might have met with him over the years. They were, of course, concerned about the long delay in initiating that case, especially since they knew that an investigator by the name of Andrew Leask, who has appeared before this commission, at that time was with the DSO in the late 90s. He mentioned that the docket was largely ready to proceed in the late 1990s. But it was one of the cases, once it was transferred back to, well, not back to, but transferred to the PCLU, that didn't get attention because of a lack of investigators. Did you get to hear about the struggle of the PCLU through the 2000s in getting investigators?
No, I wasn't aware of that at the time. I've only become subsequently aware of it.
Yeah. As it turned out, an investigating officer was eventually only appointed after the World Cup in 2010 in that case. Just trying to read my handwriting here. So let's move to paragraph 43, and this is where you and Mr. Kalada had a discussion around getting information for the Craddock 4 case, and you suggested that he might approach the history archives. Was that the South African History Archives?
Yeah, that's right.
And then you made it clear that any decision by the NDPP to reopen investigations regarding Cradock 4 would likely depend on the emergence of material information that had not been previously considered during the earlier inquests. And as you pointed out, there had already been 2 inquests, one in the 80s, and then the Zietsman inquest in the early 90s. And that then was followed by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, at which several of the perpetrators applied for amnesty. I can't remember the exact figure, but I think 7 or 8 applied for amnesty. And only 2 were granted amnesty, so the majority were refused. So from Mr. Kalata's perspective, there were significant developments following the last inquest. So would you understand from his perspective, given the refusals of most of the applicants for amnesty, that there really should have been an investigation based on the information that served before the TRC? You would have to speak into the mic.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that where I was making the suggestion about the South African History Archives was that that is where most of the TRC information went eventually. I think it started with the Department of Justice. There were some problems when I came into office around accessibility and people finding it difficult to get access, but I think those were resolved, and my understanding, I speak on the correction, was that the information was referred to the South African History Archives. But the point I was making was, so I was, I guess trying to look at ways of giving support. Maybe he had all the TRC information. But the point is that the decision as to whether to reopen another inquest or to prosecute anybody would depend on the prosecuting authority, and they would have to take that on the basis of evidence. And I'm not sure in terms of and I know there are, I think you have one particular view relating to the admissibility of evidence at the Amnesty Committee in terms of leading that in a criminal matter. But, there would be issues like that, and I don't want to engage on that. I don't know. I don't have a view on it, so I can't engage you on that.
Yes, and you do mention that in the discussion with Mr. Kalata, although you said maybe it wouldn't be admissible, I think is the view expressed. Although while we're on that, and I'm not going to tackle you on the law on the matter, but Advocate Matthew Chaskelson and myself in May of 22 submitted an opinion to the NPA in which we expressed the view that TRC evidence would be admissible, just applying the normal rules of criminal procedure. We never got a response from the NPA, notwithstanding follow-up. I can't recall if that opinion was forwarded to you and the Minister.
I don't recall you forwarding that or having seen that opinion.
Thank you. Well, let's then turn to the aspects arising from the transcript. And if I can refer you to page 29 of the transcript. And again here, this is also referring to accessing documents and materials. Mr. Kalata, perhaps it's Mr. Kalata's colleague, because it says Ms. Kalata.
Well, Ms. Kalata is Ms. Maria de la Tonga,
Yes.
who was present in the interview and participated in it. And I don't know why it comes out in the transcript that she's Ms. Kalata.
Yes, that is an unfortunate error. Anyway, she says, would the Department of Justice be open to sharing whatever evidence, opening the files? And you reply, sure. Look, I think we got most of the material. The material does need to be made accessible. And then she says, including classified documents that were kept off the record. And you say, sure. And then you talk about statute of limitations in relation to crimes like murder. Although perhaps you might have been referring to a period of time after which documents are released.
Well, she spoke about statute of its cut. I thought, well, you can see from my answer that I thought about whether there was effectively prescription on certain criminal cases, which there is, and that's why I said, but not murder. She may have, looking back at this, been referring to documents being classified for particular periods. I know there were problems of documents being classified, and I think has it not come up before this commission in terms of you're still not being able to get some of the documents? I would have thought those things should be pursued. Our classification legislation, I think it's the Protection of Information Act from the P.W. Botha era period that's still on our statute books. Probably most is in conflict with the Constitution. The Protection of State Information Bill didn't make it through Parliament.
Yes, I am aware of that. There has been an interesting development, though, on the question of classified documents as they relate to the Cradock 4 matter. Mr. Kalata's attorneys did approach the Department of Defense about 5 years ago, asking for the release of certain classified documents. Some were released, but many were not. And then matters came to a head earlier this year. Just to bring you up to speed, there was an application to have those documents released before the inquest court. I'm happy to advise the inquest court ordered the release of all those documents, notwithstanding their classification. So we would certainly agree that it is high time that these old classified documents be made available. Interestingly, the Department of Defense claimed national security for not releasing those documents. National security from the 1980s, which Judge Besher disagreed with. And then if we can turn to I do have a number of flags, but since you've already dealt with them in chief, I'm going to skip as many as I can. Yes, just a small one on page 45. We've already dealt with that bottom passage, and this is where Mr. Kalata is saying, if there was a willingness, then maybe something could have been done as far back as the 1990s, and we've already discussed that exchange around a political decision. You've explained yourself there. At the bottom of the page, you say you've seen decisions on the Simelane matter to have a prosecution. You've seen a decision on Timol in terms of an inquest. With the Simelane matter, there was litigation, as I'm sure you know. I'm not sure to what extent there was with the Timol matter. So there wasn't litigation to force a decision on the Timol matter, but the attorneys for the Timol family had to place the NPA on terms. They sent 3 letters of demand to get that inquest happening. Were you aware of that?
Yes, I think, were you not involved in bringing this to my attention? I mean, remember this transcript is from 2017, so I think had the inquest already made a judgment, a finding by 2017. But anyway, regardless, I mean, my knowledge, as reflected in that paragraph, reflects at that time. I know there was a finding by the inquest court for the prosecution of, I think it was both Mr. Rodrigues and I think another policeman. I seem to recall, I may be wrong, that you actually complained to me about why they're taking so long to prosecute, and I did then take that up with the then NDPP to say, but as I've said, you know, I'm not expecting reasons and detail, but why are you taking so long, and can you please finalize this matter? A decision has been, a judgment has been given on the basis of that there should be a prosecution on the basis of the evidence that was put before the inquest. Surely it's not doesn't need too much time to evaluate whether you can prosecute or not. So I'm aware. I thought you'd brought it up to my attention. I took it up with the NDPP, and then eventually, again, it may have been because of the letters of demand, whatever, Mr. Rodrigues was prosecuted. I think they declined to, if I'm correct, prosecute the other person.
Yes, that's correct, and thanks again for the effort you made on behalf of the family following our requests. So Rodrigues was prosecuted for murder. And then 2 other security branch officers by the name of Neville Ells and Seth Sons. Judge Motley had made a recommendation that they be further investigated for possible prosecution on grounds of perjury. I'm not going to go into that story, but the bottom line is that it took a few years to make a decision, and once the review happened and it was overturned, it was too late for various reasons to bring those cases. But turning to Rodrigues, you'll also recall that Mr. Rodrigues brought an application for permanent stay of prosecution, largely because of the long delay in bringing a prosecution against him. And it was pointed out we intervened in that matter, and I disclose again, I acted on behalf of the Timol family in the Rodrigues case. And we attempted to explain the delay. Obviously, what happened under apartheid, one couldn't expect police to investigate themselves. But in the post-apartheid era, we pointed to the obstructions that had taken place, and we put up the affidavits of Advocate Vusi Pakoli as well as
Mr. Vani, what is the clarificatory question?
So I just want to put Mr. Jeffrey into the position where he can answer the question.
Yes. I think you are now giving evidence instead of asking a question.
Yes, or I'll just assume that Mr. Jeffrey is familiar with that detail, and I'll just put the question.
Yes, you are clarifying his evidence, so put the question.
Yes. So in that litigation, the NPA did not dispute that there had been interference that blocked and delayed these cases. And the Minister of Justice was also a respondent, and there was also no comeback from the Minister. So certainly at that time, both the NPA and the Minister of Justice accepted that interference, and I should state that this interference didn't take place during your tenure as Deputy Minister, but previously, in previous years, had taken place. Do you recollect that?
No, I don't.
Sorry, Chair. I don't think that's the correct evidence. At least we don't have evidence regarding the minister accepting that there was political interference. Just to put that on record.
Yeah, I didn't say it was the minister. I said the NPA accepted that there's an affidavit to that effect, but the minister didn't respond or reply. And typically in litigation, if there's no response, then there is effective consent. Yeah.
There has been a response to that question. The witness is not aware.
Yes, I was just clarifying to my learned friend. So that you're saying that hadn't been brought to your attention at that time?
No. But it's possible that it could have. I mean, look, the way government, as I'd explained in my affidavit what my areas of responsibility were, but that I then did have some involvement with the NPA in terms of most, if not almost all memoranda to the minister would come through the deputy minister. But you said, I think that, there may have been a memorandum on this case, but I don't recall it. And it may have come through me, but I don't recall it.
Yes. But given that the minister did not dispute the allegations of Advocates Pekoli and Ackerman, and the NPA accepted it, certainly at that time, would I be right in saying that the ministry didn't have any particular reason to dispute what the NPA was saying?
Well, you're talking about the ministry. I was in the ministry at that time, I think, and I don't recall having any knowledge of this case so I just want to put that on record. Maybe you're right, but I can't, but you can't speak for me on that, and I don't recall having any knowledge of that.
Let's turn to page 47 of the transcript. And here you and Mr. Kalata were discussing various cases, the Neil Agate matter, Ashley Creel. And you point out the question really is how much from a societal perspective, how many resources do we need to put into those matters versus current matters? Mr. Kalata says, but should that even be a consideration? And then you point out, yes, because we've got to ensure from a justice perspective with diminishing budgets, you've got to ensure that, well, the ideal is if crimes are committed now, people will be held to account for them. So I think perhaps Mr. Kalata took the view that you were suggesting that that if crimes were committed now, that people have to be held to account, and that they should be given some priority.
And I think even from the transcript, I'm not arguing for a one or the other. I'm just saying that I think Mr. Kalata, maybe I perceived him as wanting considerable resources towards the post-TRC cases. And I was sort of saying, I think that yes, it's not saying they shouldn't take place, but there's also pressure for prosecutions on the current cases. I think it is problematic that there have been so few prosecutions for state corruption. close the door, I think, my own perception, is on the possibility of people coming forward still, before they die, wanting to come clean, to say, okay, this is what we did to this or that activist. And so the discovery of the remains of missing people, that's also in the last 20 years, ground to a halt. And even, I mean, you know, the issue, Reggie Khampepe, I would love to know, okay, I know what happened, I was there, I went to his funeral, so I know what happened with it to his body, but I would still love to know who did it. Was it Inkatha warlords, one of the local Nkosi? Was it other issues? Things were quite murky in KZN, as was shown by the exposure of Sifiso Nkabinda and what he then got up to. So I don't know. I'd love to know. Now, I haven't suffered the pain of losing a family member, so definitely the people that are most important in that matter are the Khampepe family. But I haven't discussed what their view is. But I'm saying the question is one of, for me personally, one of the greatest problems is the tragedies, is people not knowing particularly where the remains are, and then what the reasons were and who did it. You know, you can get and I think I refer to it a bit in the transcript, the dice is weighed in the favor of an accused in terms of guilt beyond reasonable doubt. So you can commit a crime, you can get acquitted. You can have, as you'd know, a judge or a magistrate saying, I think you're guilty, but I can't say so with beyond reasonable doubt, and therefore I've got to acquit you. Because an acquittal is not a finding of not guilty. So it's a complicated area is what I'm saying, and it's not just for me prosecutions. The issue of finding the truth is also something very important.
Thank you, Ms. Miller.
Thank you. I have nothing.
Thank you. Mr. Jeffrey, we thank you for having come to give evidence before this commission. Given your health conditions, we truly appreciate it. You are now excused as a witness.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioners.
These proceedings are adjourned until on Monday at 10 o'clock.
Yes, Mr. Chair.